I wasn't going to speak because so much of what I'd planned to say here had already been said very well, but I've been convinced that a little repetition isn't a bad thing. So I'm going to start with a quote that I saw on social media from Lexical Lies: How Language is Undermining Sex-Based Rights. And it was by the original woman in WordPress.com. Language is not a neutral tool. It is the framework through which we interpret reality, define rights, shape public consciousness. When we lose precision in language, we lose the ability to clearly defend boundaries, especially those vital to safeguarding vulnerable groups. The word woman has a specific meaning rooted in biological reality, and its erosion is a strategic dismantling of the linguistic foundations which sex-based protections stand on. To confuse, distort, or soften the word to accommodate ideological demands is to rob women of clarity, dignity, and power. Words matter because without them, truth becomes negotiable. And I'd add to that, allowing truth to be sacrificed. This applies so well to recent legal cases. In the UK, a group of women called For Women Scotland fought hard at all levels of law for several years to rescue the word woman and its precise meaning for sex-based reality, for the truth of biological materiality, to clearly define boundaries and to defend stolen rights, which had been obscured by gender ideology, with its threats to the rights of women and girls to safety, dignity, privacy, fairness, and respect. They persevered in seeking to have the legal system recognise that the Equality Act in England, like our discrimination acts in Australia, used the word sex to mean biological sex, and to acknowledge that the term gender identity had different meaning and was separately protected. Upon their appeal to the Supreme Court, they won that case this year. The court ruled that sex always meant biological sex. Now the hard work begins against the inevitable ideological pushback seeking to misrepresent this decision in a myriad of ways. However, the law is clear, as many of us always knew. The women in the UK now have the ability to continue their advocacy for institutional reinstatement of their rights. This was a much celebrated win by women here too. In Australia, the same struggle is ongoing to rescue the meaning of sex in the Sex Discrimination Act. The legal context here is somewhat different because our Sex Discrimination Act was changed in 2013 by the Gillard government to introduce gender identity as a protected category, and in the process, it distorted the definition of sex and the meaning of women. In addition, Australian states have introduced legislation allowing anyone to identify as a member of the opposite sex and to legally be recognised as such. The UK does not have what we call gender self-ID in legislation. They don't need to deal with that. Here, there has been more conflation of sex and gender identity in law, and definitions of women and men can include those who simply so identify. Women were not considered to be stakeholders in this decision-making. We in Australia can be grateful to the amazing Sal Grover, who was seeking to offer women a safe and supportive networking app called Giggle for Girls, only for women, for all the reasons most women don't need to explain to each other. Unfortunately, it was necessary for it to be explained to a man identifying as a woman who's called Roxanne Tickle, who was denied access to the app via AI facial recognition and later manually as a male. Tickle challenged the decision and the claim of indirect discrimination succeeded, with Sal having to pay damages of $10,000 and costs, and the judge stating that sex is changeable. Let's not forget that the Sex Discrimination Commissioner, Dr. Anna Cody, provided an amicus brief and assisted in interpreting the Act to this end. This has become clear. Oh, sorry, I can't read my writing. This has become that ruling has been appealed by Giggle, contending that it misinterprets the fundamental rights of women and girls and undermines the legal protections for single-sex spaces that are essential for their safety, dignity, and freedom of association. That's become most clear in the redefinition of lesbians to include men who identify as women, and this represents the erasure of lesbian rights. The critical legal question now is how should the Sex Discrimination Act be interpreted to uphold sex-based rights, which women have never ceded, while addressing gender identity claims. And I've grossly oversimplified Sal's case there. So the question of the meaning of sex is at the foundation of Sal's case. She needs help with her appeal, with funding her case. We all have an interest in this. Go to gigglecrowdfund.com to find out more, to donate if you can. This really matters because, as the article I'm quoted stated, a person's sex is not courtesy or a feeling. It is a material fact and it has material consequences, including for the true recognition of lesbian female-to-female lives, for safeguarding children. We must be relentless in our demand for precision. The word woman is not a costume, a claim, or a concept. It is a category with its roots in biology and a history written in struggle. To dilute it is to abandon every right built upon it. We must reclaim our language before we lose the ground it holds. Let's support Sal Grover as she struggles to hold that ground for all of us.